then immediately 2/3 of the world, we became defined as underdeveloped, trying to escape from this thing called underdevelopment. And then the Marxists took that over, and I mean, just to finish, an Indian ethnomusicologist was living in Germany. He made a beautiful recording of studying ethnomusic in Germany. And he kept repeating, he had little snatches of a beer cellar song of people doing yoga and the sound of jet aeroplanes going overhead. And he kept saying, the people here are suffering very, very much from overdevelopment. And, you know, I think we are all in a sense, I mean, you could say the same about Bangalore or many of us that...
Can I ask this also about Helena? Because you've written a lot about Ladakh and development for Ladakh, or what's the deal?
I'm certainly an expert on being accused of romanticizing. I've had a lot of accusations of that for almost 40 years now. And I do hope people would look at the book Ancient Futures, because in the book, I normally don't get that accusation. And I try there to distinguish between, there are these different levels that we need to look at. One of them is that if people have decided, having seen modernity, that they would like to have glass in their windows, they would like to have more heating in the winter, maybe a better system of cooling, maybe they would like to be more connected with some more modern forms of communication. That is a completely separate issue. What we're getting today in the name of development is mass urbanization and mass crises. I mean, in Ladakh, suicide was something that was maybe one in a generation. Now it's one a month. And mainly young people who are struggling to survive in this highly competitive education system and fearful of not succeeding in getting a job. So what's being created in the name of development is absolutely a lie and a hoax, exactly as Claude was spelling out. Now, the other question of whether, you know, people around the world actually would prefer some of these comforts and some of these improvements, if you like, that is a completely different question, and that's one that needs to be discussed. It is very, very clear that in terms of allocating natural resources, in terms of making use, particularly of renewable energy, we do not need to destroy life on Earth in order to make some changes to traditional situations. So it's not for me. I've never been someone who's been telling the Ladakis, you know, you should live like this, you should stay like this. My work has always been to provide information about the reality of the system that has been sold to them as hugely successful and only bringing benefits, and the stark reality, some of which Claude was spelling out. That's what our information has been about. So I think we all owe it to ourselves, to our own children, you know, right here in Bangalore, in Sweden, in Ladakh. It really doesn't matter anymore if we're very traditional or very modern. We all need to wake up to the fact that the current economic system is a rapidly moving machine that is robbing all of us, really, of a future. So must not get caught up in these discussions about tradition and development, and that would, you know, completely cloud over an understanding of what we're really talking about.
Do you want to say something about this, Camila? Because we hear about the favelas of Brazil, we hear also about the plight of indigenous peoples all over the Amazon. Would you like to share something?
Actually, we have a debate, ongoing debate in Latin America about alternatives to development. This has been growing, especially with the progressive governments that have been elected in the Andean region of Latin America in the past decade. And one common agreement of this public debate, of course, it's very restricted yet, it's not a massive debate, but we have a lot of indigenous intellectuals and people that are leaders of movements that are putting forward this very clear thinking that progress itself, this idea of progress, it's a heritage from the 19th century epistemology that opened the timeline and sent us to this eternal future where there's always something that we have to move forward in order to perfect ourselves. But this and the European intellectual history of the 19th century cannot be separated of its colonial history and what was happening elsewhere. In the same way, when the term development was presented in 49 by President Truman, it was the synonymous for the US hegemony, the post-World War II. One very clear proof of this is that the World Bank, one of the Bretton Woods institutions, was created to reconstruct Europe and develop. So then, right away, especially in Latin America, we started with this underdevelopment school and to debate this concept that became more like this dispositive that imprisons our minds. And what worries me most has as hostage our political discourse, because we cannot speak, and there are no political parties that dare to say that they are against development. When development got in crisis in the late 60s, and that was this open of the limits to growth, and the first UN summit on environment in Stockholm in 72, they started a process to add in 87 sustainable development, to give a new name for it, because just development was not working very good. Well, of course, the process went worse and worse and worse, and more recently we had this new shape of the same content that now presents itself as the green economy. So currently, everything you hear about low carbon economy, low carbon growth, just place carbon around, because I hope this we can address in the workshop in the afternoon. But how climate change has a major content of a vested trade agenda, of what is being negotiated currently to set up a global agreement at the end of 2015. It's massively about trade and nothing to do about climate. But back to the green economy. So now we are facing with this green economy, and the governments of the South putting forward, in agreement with the North, this new vision for economy. This is something I also think we would need to discuss in here. That is not only the movement that are thinking of economics of happiness, and that there is something structurally wrong, and that we need to come out together with something. The system, the elephant, or I must say the green elephant, has figured it out at the same way that people are very discontent, and they are feeling that something is intrinsically wrong, and they have shaped a narrative that is very, very compelling. And just to give you one anecdotal example, when we criticize what is being proposed, and Brazil is the laboratory for the green economy and all its mechanisms, they say, oh, but how do you say that? Because it's Indian, it's a guy from India, this economist, this brilliant economist from India that has worked with microcredit that is proposing it. So I don't know if you're familiar with Pavan Sukhdev, but Pavan Sukhdev is a frequent flyer to Brazil, where he meets with all our corporation where he's teaching all of our GMO industry and our steel industry. Now we have green iron. We have, of course, responsible, sustainable green GMO soy. We have this responsible cattle, of course, to slaughter and to export. But all of this packaged into this new bright green future of the natural capital, and how to commodify it to the last straw, all the package of environmental services. But of course, it's very hard for us to criticize, because after all, it is coming from India. So we need your support, because this is just one cherry on this whole development prison that we are all caged within, and that we have to face it as it was an invention, it was a concept invented, inserted, and repeated to make us. I think it's the air conditioning here. But anyhow, there is a lot of thinking going on in Latin America about how those governments that try to do something different, how they can talk in terms of electoral discourse, about public discourse, alternatives to development. Because nowadays is a political suicide. You say in public that you are against development and that are criticizing development. And this is the most fundamental issue that we need to bring forward.
Thank you. Aseem, I'd like you to talk a little bit. Like, one of the things we're seeing is inequality that's happening. How can we understand that? Can you share something, or do we need to be talking about that?
Yeah, before that, can I say something about development?
Sure.
When you actually take away the wrappings, what is development really about? It is about the conversion of life into money. Fundamentally, that is what it's about. What is progress? Roughly the same thing, with the added dimension that you have technological razzmatazz. You have technology to impress an already suffering species. There's something much more powerful than humanity on Earth. The two things which I think are important to understand is the things related to what Charles was saying earlier, which is the separation from nature and the separation from each other. And I want to share with you two short stories from personal experience, or at least from friends close to me, to illustrate what I mean. A friend of mine who's an anthropologist, an American, takes his 8-year-old son to France. And they're staying on a friend's farm. And in the morning, he hears these shrieks. So it's cattle being killed in order to yield beef. And this 8-year-old child, he completely freaks out. He goes crazy. He's non-vegetarian. He goes completely crazy because till that point, he had thought that cattle yields beef the way it yields milk. So that's what happens when you've only encountered beef in the supermarket, when you don't have a sense of the connection between nature and culture and so on. And the alienation within human cultures, I'll give you an example of, this is something which happened to a friend of mine. So this is an Indian friend who first goes to the US 25 years ago, and one night her roommate knocks on her door and she asks the following question: "Can I borrow an onion from you?" So my friend asks her to repeat the question, and she says, "Can I borrow an onion from you?" Now, the concept of borrowing an onion does not exist in our culture for reasons that shouldn't need to be explained. If a culture has reached the point where this question becomes a reasonable question to ask, then there has been massive cultural, social devastation preceding that. And that is what one needs to talk about in India today, when everybody's being drugged with the idea of development. We need to ask ourselves a very simple question. Do we want our children to grow up in an economy or in a society, in a human community? And at this point of time, I believe there is a choice. All of us are being invited to live in an economy and are being invited to take our positions in the global market economy. And there's a pecking order, there's a hierarchy, there's a race which has been unleashed. You're supposed to be a winner in that race, and only if you win will everybody love you, otherwise you are nobody, etc. So the winner becomes conservative because they have to keep their winning spot, and the loser becomes conservative in a different sense because they have to chase the winners. Otherwise, their identity, their relationships, their sense of community, everything is destroyed. Now, yesterday I was sharing with some friends a little metaphor of how... What do you mean conservative? you fundamentally do not want to change. You want to become like them. So there used to be an ad, a commercial on American television many years ago when Michael Jordan used to play basketball. And the ad was a Nike ad, and it said, "I'd like to be like Mike." Right? You don't want to be yourself. You don't want to even vaguely resemble yourself. Right? You want to become like someone out there who's Sachin or who's Mike or who's Tiger or who's somebody who's won a race, right? So we've all been indoctrinated into a wannabe world, right? Now, what I'm trying to get at is that in order to sell Facebook, in order to sell that product to you, they need to destroy the real thing. If they cannot destroy the real thing, there is no market for Facebook. Something which is complete fiction. Facebook is pure fiction. It's objectified human illusions, calling itself a society, right? It's a network pretending to be a community. How does it sell itself? It can only sell itself if you've first broken the community, you've created alienated, atomized individuals who then are desperate to reconnect. Notice the number of times we use that verb these days, connect. Why do we need to? I mean, if you're already a part of nature, already a part of human society and community, the concept of getting connected should not exist. It's an assumption. That's how many of us grew up in the 60s, 70s, 80s. So the idea of connection emerges when you've already broken down society. And if you've got an economy which is a predatory economy, fundamentally an invasive economy, a war-based economy, which makes money when it destroys, and it makes money when it restores. It can never create anything. This whole business about value addition and creation of wealth is pure fiction. You've destroyed something real, and you're trying to replace it with something artificial. And you have a scarcity of everything. And that's how you make money. So that's my point, basically, that development is basically about the destruction of society in order to create an artificial economy.
This is all like, I don't know, feeling a little bit overwhelmed. Like, this thing is so huge, right? This global corporate machinery, it's like huge. Do we really have any chance, Charles?
Say no.
Like we're it's great. We're 1,000 people in this room, yeah, but do we really have a chance? Like McDonald's and Coca-Cola and their billion-dollar budgets.
Say no.
Forget David and Goliath, buddy.
Yeah.
Rationally, it's very hard to make a persuasive case that we have a chance. And anytime I'm feeling optimistic, sometimes I'll take a little dose of doom and gloom. There's plenty of websites for that. And the problems do seem very overwhelming. But I think that all of us have had experiences that give us a glimpse of what is possible in the world. I was very moved when I first encountered Helena's work, describing the society that was there, that seemed, the title of the book, Ancient Futures, it says this isn't just this thing that we have to preserve, and isn't it terrible that it's disappearing, we have to preserve it at all costs, but it's also telling us something important about how the world could be. And I think that we all carry some kind of knowledge that the world is supposed to be and can be much more beautiful and authentic and connected and intimate than what we've been offered as normal. And also that we know that that it's possible to get there, and we know that this possibility isn't some theoretical, maybe it could happen if enough people get it, but that we ourselves, each one of us, have agency in making this happen. And this is contrary to our rational understanding of how to make something happen in the world. Carlo now is part of a movement with 9 million people in India, in Italy, or maybe even more. And it only started maybe 6-7 years ago, and it wasn't that those